The Vraxis ship's loading bay doors slid open with a hiss, revealing its cargo, not minerals or fuel cells, but humans. Hundreds of them, chained together in neat rows, their eyes vacant, their spirits broken, all except one. Korik Valen watched, from between matted strands of copper hair as the alien guards approached. 7 feet tall with exoskeletons that gleamed like oil-slicked metal and too many joints in their limbs, the Vraxis moved with predatory grace. The tallest one grasped a neural whip that crackled with blue energy. Move, it clicked in the crude translation device at its throat. Unlike the others, Korik's eyes weren't vacant. They burned. 10 years of captivity had not dimmed the fire within him, merely banked it, waiting. The Vraxis had conquered Earth in a single day, their technology so far beyond humanity's that resistance seemed futile. They'd reduced major cities to ash before most humans even knew what was happening. Those who survived became commodities, labor, units to be traded across the vast Vraxis empire. But they had made a critical mistake. They thought humans were beaten, not biding time. The processing facility on Nexus Prime was a sprawling complex of gleaming metal and cold efficiency. As Korik shuffled forward with the other captives, he caught the eye of Elowen Maris, the ship's engineer they'd turned 2 cycles ago. She gave an imperceptible nod. 3 years of planning. 3 years of collecting information from converted Vraxis sympathizers like Elowen. 3 years of passing messages through the labor networks that spanned 17 worlds. Today was the day humanity would remind the galaxy why you should never cage something you don't fully understand. Holding cell breach in Sector 7, announced a mechanical voice over the facility's comm system. The guard's attention shifted. Perfect. Korik lunged, his seemingly frail body belying years of secret conditioning in the mining pits. He twisted the nearest guard's neural whip from its grasp and, before the creature could react, plunged the crackling end into the junction between head and thorax, where Elowen had told them the nervous system was most vulnerable. The facility erupted into chaos. From seemingly nowhere, makeshift weapons appeared in the hands of the broken humans. Guards fell beneath the unexpected onslaught, their chitinous armor cracking under determined blows. "Communications hub," Korik shouted above the din. "Lyra, Daxon. With me." Lyra Kintaris, once Earth's foremost xenolinguist, now scarred from years of labor, nodded grimly. Beside her, Daxon Reed, a former military strategist whose tactical mind had conceived much of this plan, fell into step. They fought their way through corridors, leaving a trail of stunned or dead Vraxis in their wake. The resistance wasn't just happening here. Across 17 worlds, at precisely the same moment, humans were rising up. The supposedly docile labor force had become an army overnight. In the communications hub, Lyra's fingers flew over alien controls, broadcasting the signal that would spark uprisings across the Empire. Meanwhile, Korik accessed the facility's defense systems. "How long until they realize what's happening?" Daxon asked, securing the door. "Not long enough," Korik replied, his face illuminated by the glow of alien screens. But long enough. Outside, they could hear the sounds of battle intensifying. Humans using stolen weapons, improvised explosives, anything they could grasp. The Vraxis had superior technology, but they'd grown complacent. They hadn't prepared for the sheer determination of a species fighting for its freedom. As Korik activated the final sequence, overriding the facility's security protocols, he allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. The first step of humanity's rebellion had begun. The chains that had held them were breaking. Across the stars, humans were rising, and their captors were about to learn that technological superiority meant nothing in the face of a species that refused to be extinguished. The uprising spread like wildfire through the Vraxis Empire. What began as seemingly isolated incidents on mining colonies and labor camps evolved into a coordinated assault that caught the alien overlords completely unprepared. Meridian Station hung in space like a massive steel spider, its 8 arms extending outward from a central hub. Once a human research outpost, the Vraxis had converted it into a strategic command center after the conquest. Now it was the focal point of rebellion in the Cygnus sector. Commander Isolde Navarre stood on the observation deck, watching as the stolen Vraxis cruiser Defiance emerged from slipspace, trailing blue energy. Her silver-streaked black hair was pulled back in a tight braid, her face bearing the distinctive cross-shaped scar all human overseers were forced to receive. But today, that mark of shame had become a badge of honor. The Defiance has docked. Successfully, reported Orion, her communication specialist. Captain Riker sends word the weapon schematics were recovered intact. A rare smile crossed Isolde's face. Tell them well done, and alert Vizal that his expertise will soon be required. Vizal Tanara was one of the few Vraxis who had turned against his own kind, having witnessed firsthand the atrocities committed in the name of imperial expansion. His knowledge of Vraxis weapons systems was proving invaluable. 5 weeks into the rebellion, and already 7 major outposts had fallen to human control. The Vraxis response had been predictably brutal but disorganized. They'd never conceived that their captive workforce could pose a genuine military threat. "Commander," called Zephyr Caden, approaching with a tablet displaying tactical readouts. "The Vraxis are pulling forces from the Arcturus mining colony to reinforce their position at Nexus Prime." Isolde nodded. "As expected. Have our people on Arcturus prepared? The moment the garrison depletes, they'll take control of the antimatter refineries. If all goes according to plan, we'll control 20% of the Empire's fuel production by the end of the cycle." The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Force the Vraxis to spread themselves thin, then strike at their resource chains. Without fuel, their massive warships became nothing more than drifting metal coffins. Meanwhile, in the station's converted medical bay, Dr. Elara Kessian worked furiously on what might be humanity's greatest hope, or its most terrible weapon. The laboratory had been hastily assembled from stolen equipment, but it served its purpose. "How close are we?" asked Korik Valen, who had arrived at Meridian 3 days earlier after orchestrating the Nexus Prime uprising. Elara didn't look up from her microscope. "Close. The Vraxis biotechnology is elegant. Terrible but elegant. Their exoskeletons aren't natural. They're engineered symbiotes, which means they can be compromised. A weakness we can exploit? Better." Elara's eyes gleamed with the intensity of someone who had lost everything and now saw a path to retribution, a way to turn their greatest strength against them. Outside in the corridor, Daxon Reed was conducting combat training with recently freed laborers. The humans had quickly discovered that their smaller size and apparent weakness could become advantages in the right circumstances. Vraxis exoskeletons made them strong but inflexible. Humans were learning to fight in ways the aliens couldn't counter. "Again," Daxon commanded, as a group of 20 fighters practiced the disabling move that targeted the neural junction at the base of the Vraxis skull. "Remember, they expect direct confrontation. They're not prepared for how humans fight when we have nothing left to lose." As Meridian Station continued its quiet preparations, reports flooded in from across the Empire. Human uprisings were gaining momentum. The Vraxis still controlled the major military assets, but for every rebellion they crushed, 3 more ignited elsewhere. Most importantly, the humans had acquired something the Vraxis never expected them: to grasp hope. Not the desperate hope of the condemned, but the fierce hope of a species reclaiming its destiny. In her quarters later that night, Isolde reviewed the latest intelligence reports. The Vraxis Emperor had finally recognized the human rebellion as more than a minor inconvenience. Their response would soon come, and it would be devastating. But humanity would be ready. They had to be. The Vraxis counterattack came with the dawn of the third month. Their massive dreadnought, the Imperial Judgment, emerged from slipspace, above the human-controlled Meridian Station, its hull bristling with weapon ports. Behind it came a flotilla of destroyer-class vessels, arranged in the Vraxis signature arrowhead formation. Battle stations, Isolde ordered calmly as alarms, blared throughout the station. Execute Protocol Omega. The observation deck transformed into a command center, holographic displays showing the approaching Vraxis fleet. Tactical officers moved with practiced precision. 3 months of rebellion had forged them into a disciplined fighting force. They've brought more ships than anticipated, Orion noted grimly. But exactly the class of vessels we expected, Isolde replied. Send the signal to Nexus Fleet. It's time to spring the trap. Far behind the Vraxis Armada, 6 human-controlled ships, silently, disengaged their cloaking fields, technology reverse-engineered from captured Vraxis vessels. They carried no conventional weapons, only the bioengineered payload Dr. Alara had perfected. On the lead ship, Horizon's Dawn, Coric Valen gave the deployment order. Release the contagion. Microscopic drones, each carrying Alara's engineered virus, swarmed toward the Vraxis vessels. Invisible to sensors and smaller than dust motes, they sought out the external ventilation systems all Vraxis ships required due to their atmospheric needs. Meanwhile, Meridian Station appeared to be preparing for a desperate last stand. Its shields flared to full power, and the few defensive weapons it possessed aimed at the approaching dreadnought. Imperial Judgment is hailing us, Orion reported. On screen, Isolde commanded. The view screen filled with the image of Supreme. Commander Drax of Vorn, his exoskeleton gleaming with ceremonial markings that denoted his high rank within the Empire. Human rebels, the Vraxis intoned, its translator rendering the clicks and chittering into flat, emotionless speech. Your insurrection ends today. Surrender your leaders for immediate execution, and the remainder will be permitted to return to labor status with minimal punishment. Isolde smiled coldly. We have a counter-proposal, Commander. Withdraw from all human-occupied worlds. Recognize our sovereignty, and we'll permit your forces to retreat without pursuit. The Vraxis commander's compound eyes gleamed with what might have been amusement. You are in no position to make demands. Your species will learn its place in the natural order, as servants to the superior race. Superior? Isolde leaned forward. Let's test that theory. She cut the transmission with a gesture and turned to her tactical officer. Status of the contagion? Breaching their environmental systems now, estimated full dispersal in 3 minutes. The Vraxis fleet continued its advance, unaware of the invisible threat infiltrating their ships. On the Dreadnought's command deck, Supreme Commander Drax Vorn was preparing to deliver the killing blow to the human rebellion when the first officer collapsed, its exoskeleton suddenly losing structural integrity. Within minutes, chaos engulfed the Vraxis fleet. The bioengineered virus attacked the symbiotic bond between the Vraxis and their exoskeletons, causing catastrophic nervous system failures. Ships veered off course as their crews succumbed, crashing into one another or drifting powerless. The virus is working faster than projected, Alara reported from her lab, monitoring the data feeds. Their biology is actually accelerating the effect. Isolde watched the unfolding devastation with a complex mixture of vindication and solemnity. This was not a moment for celebration, but a necessary step toward freedom. Launch the boarding parties, she ordered. Secure the Dreadnought's command systems and weapons database before they can initiate self-destruct protocols. As human strike teams deployed toward the now vulnerable Vraxis vessels, Daxon Reed led the primary boarding party onto the Imperial Judgment. They encountered minimal resistance. Most of the crew were incapacitated or dead, their once formidable exoskeletons now fused to their bodies in grotesque configurations. In the engine room, Vizal Tanara worked swiftly to override the dreadnought's security systems, his hands moving with the certainty of one who had helped design these very ships. "We have control of the weapons systems," he reported, his Vraxis voice oddly subdued, "and access to the central military database." Back on Meridian Station, Isolde received word of their success with grim satisfaction. The human rebellion had just acquired the means to strike at the very heart of the Vraxis Empire. The counterattack had failed spectacularly, transforming into humanity's greatest victory yet. But even as they celebrated this triumph, Isolde knew the war was far from over. The Vraxis would adapt. They would develop countermeasures to the virus. And next time, they would come with even greater force. Humanity needed to press its advantage while it had one. "Set course for the Vraxis homeworld," she ordered. "It's time to bring this war to their doorstep." The Vraxis homeworld of Ixion Prime hung like a jewel in space, its atmosphere swirling with crimson and gold clouds, its 3 moons arranged in perfect triangulation. From the command deck of the captured dreadnought, now renamed Humanity's Vengeance, Isolde studied the planet with narrowed eyes. "Their defenses are formidable," Korik observed, standing beside her. "Orbital platforms. Defensive fleets, planetary shields, a direct assault would be suicide." "Which is why we won't be assaulting anything," Isolde replied, her lips curving in a cold smile. "At least not in the way they expect." The human rebellion had grown sophisticated in the 5 months since the first uprising. They'd learned that victory against the technologically superior Vraxis required strategy over brute force, intelligence over direct confrontation, deception above all. Lyra Kintaris entered the command deck, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes bright with purpose. "The message is ready for transmission. I've encoded it using high Imperial protocols. They'll believe it comes from their own military command." "And our agent on the surface?" Isolde asked, in position and awaiting the signal. The plan was audacious in its complexity. While the Vraxis expected a military strike from the rebellious humans, they would instead face an enemy from within, an engineered truth that would shatter the foundations of their society. Vizal had provided the crucial information. The Vraxis Empire was built on a biological hierarchy, with the ruling caste genetically engineered for intellectual superiority. But that superiority was largely fabricated, maintained through chemical suppressants administered to the lower castes through their environmental systems. The Empire's strength was also its vulnerability. "Begin transmission," Isolde ordered. "Across." Ixion Prime communication systems suddenly broadcast a message seemingly from the Imperial Scientific Authority. It revealed the centuries-long deception perpetrated against the worker and warrior castes, how their potential had been artificially limited, their evolution stunted, all to maintain the power of the ruling elite. Simultaneously, the human agent, on the surface, Nimue Frost, an infiltration specialist who had undergone extensive surgical modification to pass as a Vraxis servant, introduced a neutralizing agent into the central atmospheric processors. For the first time in generations, the lower castes would experience clarity of thought, their full cognitive potential unleashed. "They're scrambling to suppress the broadcast," Orion reported, monitoring Vraxis communications. "But it's too late. Our transmission has reached 80% of population centers." From orbit, they watched as confusion gave way to understanding, and understanding to rage. The first riots erupted in the industrial sectors, spreading quickly to the military compounds. The Vraxis warrior caste, bred for loyalty but now awakening to their own subjugation, turned their weapons against their former masters. "Civil war," Daxon murmured, watching the tactical displays showing outbreaks of violence across the planet. "Just as we planned." Ilara joined them on the command deck, her expression troubled despite their apparent success. This feels wrong somehow. Using their own oppression against them. They had no such moral qualms when they decimated Earth, Korik responded, his voice hard with memories of loss. When they enslaved our people, when they treated us as livestock rather than sentient beings. We're not them, Alara insisted. That's the point of all this, isn't it? To prove we're better? Isolde raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. We're offering them a path to freedom from their own tyranny. What they do with that freedom is their choice, just as ours was taken from us. She turned to Orion. Prepare to broadcast the second message. The second transmission offered an alliance between liberated humans and the newly awakened Vraxis castes against their common oppressor, the Imperial ruling elite. It was a calculated risk, banking on the shared experience of subjugation to forge an unlikely partnership. Hours passed as they watched the chaos unfold on the planet below. Reports filtered in of Imperial strongholds falling, of ruling caste members being captured or killed, of military units pledging allegiance to the revolution. Then came the response they had hoped for, a transmission from General Kralvorks, commander of the Vraxis Third Fleet and member of the warrior caste. Your words have merit, humans, the general's translated voice rumbled. We have lived as tools of the Imperial caste, believing ourselves superior to all other species while blind to our own chains. The deception ends today. Isolde stepped forward. Then let us negotiate as equals, General. The future need not be written in the blood of either of our species. As arrangements were made for a historic meeting between human resistance leaders and the representatives of the Vraxis Liberation Forces, Isolde withdrew to her private quarters. There, away from the eyes of her crew, she allowed herself a moment of doubt. They had turned an enemy against itself, potentially saving countless human lives by avoiding a protracted war. But victory through deception left a bitter taste. Would humanity become what it fought against in its quest for freedom? The question remained unanswered as she returned to the command deck to prepare for the negotiations that would shape the future of both species. The negotiations took place on neutral ground, an ancient space station orbiting Ixion's smallest moon. Once a cultural exchange center before the Vraxis Empire's expansionist era, its grand hall now served as the unlikely setting for an alliance between former enemies. Isolde led the human delegation, accompanied by Korik, Ilara, and Daxon. Across the polished obsidian table sat General Kralvorks, flanked by representatives of the warrior and worker castes. The tension in the room was palpable, centuries of hatred and misunderstanding hanging between them like an invisible barrier. Let us speak plainly, Kralvorks began, his translator rendering his chittering speech into measured tones. What you have done to our society cannot be undone. The Empire as we knew it is fracturing. Civil war engulfs 8 major systems already. And yet you're here, Isolde observed, which suggests you see a path forward through cooperation rather than continued conflict. The general's compound eyes gleamed. The ruling caste deceived us all. They engineered our bodies for strength but suppressed our minds to maintain control. We were weapons pointed at their enemies, never questioning why. Not unlike how humans were used, Korik interjected. Disposable labor, resources to be consumed. Kralvorks made a clicking sound the translator didn't capture, something like acknowledgement. There is symmetry in our situations. What followed was 12 hours of intense negotiation, cultural barriers slowly giving way to mutual understanding. The Vraxis delegates learned of Earth's destruction, of human resilience, of the rebellion born in the darkest mines and labor camps. The humans learned of Vraxis society before imperial corruption, of philosophical traditions that valued balance in all things, of cultural achievements buried beneath millennia of militaristic expansion. By the 5th hour, architectural designs were being shared across the table, plans for habitats that could accommodate both species' biological needs. By the 8th, joint military operations against Imperial strongholds were being mapped out. By the 10th, a framework for a new interspecies council was taking shape. "We call it the Covenant of Equals," Isolde announced as the final terms were agreed upon. Neither species subjugating the other. A mutual defense pact against Imperial forces, and a commitment to restore what was destroyed. As the delegates signed the historic document, Nimue Frost, now recovered from her infiltration mission, approached Ilara in a quiet corner of the hall. "You seem troubled," Nimue observed, her features still bearing subtle signs of the surgical alterations that had allowed her to pass as a Vraxis servant. Ilara sighed. "I designed a virus that killed thousands of Vraxis. Now I'm supposed to work alongside them as if that never happened. Would you rather we'd continued fighting until one species was extinct?" Nimue asked softly. "Of course not. It's just—" Ilara's gaze drifted to where Vaisal Tanara was engaged in animated discussion with other Vraxis scientists, sharing information about the chemical suppressants used by the Imperial caste. "I wonder if we're deceiving ourselves about how easily centuries of hatred can be overcome." "Not easily," Nimue replied, "but necessarily." As the newly formed alliance prepared to face the remaining Imperial forces, joint operations began almost immediately. Human adaptability combined with Vraxis strength proved devastatingly effective against Imperial resistance. Within weeks, 3 major Imperial strongholds had fallen with minimal casualties. The most striking symbol of the alliance came when the Vraxis engineers, working alongside human designers, unveiled the prototype for a new class of ship. Neither wholly human nor Vraxis in design, the Covenant vessel incorporated the best technologies of both species. Its weapons systems were formidable, but equally impressive were its scientific and exploratory capabilities. A ship built not just for war, but for the peace they hoped would follow. On the observation deck of Humanity's Vengeance, Isolde and Kralvorks watched as the prototype completed its first test flight, gracefully maneuvering through an asteroid field. "It is beautiful," the Vraxis general admitted, "unlike anything either of our species has created alone." "That's the point," Isolde replied. "Apart, we were vulnerable. Together—" She left the thought unfinished as the prototype executed a perfect high-velocity turn that would have been impossible for either human or Vraxis ships. But even as the alliance grew stronger, the Imperial forces were gathering for what intelligence suggested would be a final desperate assault. The ruling caste, facing extinction, had activated ancient weapons platforms long thought decommissioned. Their target, Earth's solar system. A symbolic strike against the heart of human resistance. "They mean to finish what they started," Korik said grimly during the emergency council meeting. "To erase Earth completely from the galaxy." Kralvorks' exoskeleton rippled with anger. "Then they will face both our people's wrath. The Covenant stands ready." As the joint fleet prepared for the coming battle, Isolde found herself pondering the strange path that had led them here, from chains to revolution, from hatred to alliance. Whatever came next would determine not just the fate of humans and Vraxis, but perhaps the future of interspecies relations throughout the galaxy. The final confrontation was approaching, and this time they would face it together. The Imperial Armada appeared at the edge of Earth's solar system like a storm front, 50 capital ships emerging from slip space in perfect formation, surrounded by hundreds of fighter craft. At their center loomed the Emperor's Wrath, a battle station larger than any vessel ever recorded in galactic history, its surface bristling with planet-killer weapons. "They've committed everything they have left," Korik observed from the command deck of the Covenant flagship, Unity. "This is their final stand." The joint human-Vraxis defensive fleet waited in orbit around Mars, 47 ships of mixed, design, crewed by beings who months earlier had been mortal enemies. Now they stood as the last line of defense for a shattered Earth that was just beginning to show signs of recovery. Admiral Isolde Navarre, elevated to command the unified fleet, surveyed the tactical displays with calm determination. Beside her, General Kral Vorks chittered quiet orders to his officers. "They outnumber us," the general stated. "They always have," Isolde replied. "But numbers aren't everything." What the Imperial forces didn't know was that the defensive fleet was merely the visible part of the Covenant's strategy. Throughout the solar system, cloaked minds waited in carefully calculated positions. On Phobos, Mars's largest moon, a massive energy cannon had been constructed in secret, powered by technology from both species, and within the asteroid belt, specially modified ships carrying Ilara's refined bioweapon stood ready. All units, "Battle stations," Isolde commanded as the Imperial fleet began its advance. "Execute Operation Phoenix." The battle erupted with blinding intensity. Imperial ships plowed forward with the confidence of technological superiority, unleashing devastating barrages. The Covenant fleet adopted the fluid, unpredictable formation Daxon had developed. Smaller, faster ships darting between larger vessels, confounding Imperial targeting systems. On the bridge of the Emperor's Wrath, High Commander Zex Truhl watched with mounting fury as the supposedly inferior Allied fleet held its ground. "Impossible," he hissed. "They cannot withstand our firepower." "My lord," his second-in-command reported hesitantly, "our forward units are reporting unusual energy readings from the Martian moon." Before the commander could respond, the Phobos cannon fired, a concentrated beam of energy that sliced through 3 Imperial dreadnoughts as if they were paper. Simultaneously, the cloaked mines activated, their detonations creating a complex pattern that disrupted the Imperial formation. "Now!" Isolde ordered. From their hiding places in the asteroid belt, the bioweapon ships emerged, launching their payloads. Unlike the earlier virus that had targeted the Vraxis exoskeletons, this weapon was designed specifically for the unique biology of the Imperial caste. Developed with Vizal's help to affect only those who had undergone the genetic modifications. That marked the ruling elite. The effect was immediate. On Imperial ships, commanding officers collapsed, their enhanced bodies turning against them. Control systems designed to respond only to Imperial caste commands suddenly went dark. "Forward elements in disarray," Daxon reported. "Their command structure is collapsing." Isolde nodded grimly. "All ships, advance. Target their engines and weapon systems. We want survivors." The tide turned swiftly. Without their commanders and with their formations broken, the Imperial ships fell one by one to the coordinated attacks of the Covenant fleet. Some surrendered when they realized what was happening. Others fought to the last, their crews indoctrinated, with the belief that death was preferable to defeat. As the battle raged, the Unity took heavy damage, leading an assault on the Emperor's Wrath. Fire erupted on the command deck, systems failing across the ship. Hull breach on decks 3 through 7, a human officer reported, blood streaming from a gash on her forehead. "We can't take another hit like that." Kral Vorks moved to a damaged console, his exoskeleton allowing him to withstand the heat of nearby flames. "Rerouting power from life support to shields. It will give us 6 minutes. Enough time to get within." "Range," Isolde decided. "Prepare the boarding parties." What followed was the most daring action of the entire war, a joint strike team of humans and Vraxis warriors launching directly into the heart of the Imperial battle station. Korik led the human contingent, Kral Vorks' second-in-command, the Vraxis force. Their objective, capture the central control room and end the war once and for all. The fighting was brutal. Corridor by corridor, chamber by chamber. Human adaptability complemented Vraxis' strength, the two species having learned to fight as one during months of joint operations. They suffered losses but pressed forward relentlessly. In the station's central chamber, they found High Commander Zexatrul, last of the Imperial Ruling Council, surrounded by his elite guard. "You defile yourselves by allying with these creatures," the commander spat at the Vraxis warriors. "You betray millennia of evolutionary superiority." "We reclaim our freedom," replied Kralvorx's second, "from you and the lies you used to control us." The final confrontation was swift and decisive. The Imperial Guards, still loyal but confused by the bioweapon affecting their commander, were overcome by the coordinated assault. Zexatrul himself fell to a combined attack from Korik and a Vraxis warrior, his once magnificent exoskeleton failing as the bioweapon completed its work. With the capture of the Emperor's Wrath, the remaining Imperial forces surrendered. The war that had begun with Earth's subjugation ended with a victory few could have imagined, not just for humanity, but for all who had suffered under Imperial rule. In the aftermath, as recovery operations began and the wounded were treated, Isolde stood before the combined crews of the Covenant fleet, humans and Vraxis together, their differences stark, but their purpose united. "Today marks not just the end of a war," she declared, her voice carrying across the vast hangar bay, "but the beginning of a new chapter in galactic history. We have proven that the greatest strength comes not from domination, but cooperation. Not from enslaving others, but from recognizing the unique value each species brings to the stars." Kralvorx stepped forward to stand beside her. "From the ashes of empire, we will build something better. The Covenant of Equals expands its hand to all species who wish to join in peace." The formal signing of the Galactic Covenant took place 1 year later on a terraforming platform in Earth's orbit. As the document was sealed, the first green shoots were visible on the planet's surface, signs of life returning to a world once thought beyond salvation. Korik Valen, now ambassador to the Covenant Council, watched the ceremony with Ilara beside him. "Did you ever imagine, when we were planning that first uprising, that it would end like this?" he asked. "No," she admitted. "I was fighting for vengeance then. For humanity's survival. I never thought—" She gestured to the assembled delegates, not just humans and Vraxis, but representatives from a dozen other species who had suffered under Imperial rule and now sought membership in the new alliance. A view screen. They could see the first of the new Covenant exploration vessels preparing to depart, the Horizon Unbounded, crewed by multiple species and dedicated to peaceful contact with worlds beyond known space. "Their chains couldn't hold us," Korik murmured, recalling the battle cry of the early rebellion. "And their armies fell in flames," Ilara finished. "But from those flames, something new was born." Together, they watched as Earth continued its slow healing, mirroring the greater healing taking place across a galaxy, emerging from the long shadow of empire into the light of cooperation and mutual respect. Not an ending, but a beginning. The stars awaited.